Hi, my name is Roger Burt. I'm with Avant Assessment, and I'm excited to share with you today the power of data-driven teaching. And everything that I'm going to share comes from my experience as a high school Spanish teacher in Clearfield High School in the Davis School District. And Davis School District is located about 20 minutes north of Salt Lake City and is home to a large and thriving dual language immersion program and has been a member of College Board's AP Honor Roll. So when I began my teaching career, I saw a lot of similarities between what I was doing and construction. And I see it that way because I like to do small projects around my house. And as I do so, I need certain things that I also need in the classroom. So the first thing that I need when I'm beginning a project is I need to measure. I need to measure the space that I'm working with to know how that space is, how it's made up, what kinds of things might be able to fit in there, what things might not be able to fit in there. And that helps me determine how things are going to go forward. After getting my measurements, I also need blueprints. So I get my measurements and I get that all down on paper. The blueprints help me get the vision that I have for it down on paper, and then helps me determine if what I would like to have happen with that space is realistic or not. And it also helps me to see what my steps are going to be from beginning to end. And so after that, I prepare my work environment so that I have an appropriate work environment. So I put up my workbench, get my tools on there, put up plastic sheeting where I might need to keep that area clean, and anything else that is appropriate to the job. And then the last thing is I need tools, including measurement. And tools are going to do their specific jobs to help me put everything together and put things in place. And I'm going to continue measuring all the way through the project, because otherwise we could have a disaster on our hands. So the role of measurement is to help inform how things are going, and to compare that to where things need to be by the end. So as language teachers, we need all of these same things. We need to measure our students, and we have a variety of ways of doing so, each of which has its place. We have proficiency testing, performance testing, summative, formative, all kinds of testing, quizzes, things like that we have at our disposal to make sure that things are going according to plan. We also have blueprints, which in my mind is our curriculum. Our curriculum will hopefully take us from day one, Spanish 1, all the way through the last day of AP or IB or whatever the end of our time with these students may be. And then an appropriate work environment. We need that as teachers. And that's interesting because as teachers, we have so many environments in which we work. We work in the environment of our classroom, where we have the most control. We work in the environment of our school, our community, our district, state, and so on. So we have all of these different environments where we're working, and we have varying levels of control over those. And then we also have tools, and tools for us as language teachers are our methods, our training, our professional development, and so on and so on. And so with that analogy, my first year teaching, I actually started at a junior high school, which was grades 7, 8, and 9. And I was teaching Spanish 1, 2, and 3. And as a first year teacher, that alone was quite a load to take on. If I could get to bed by midnight every night, that was pretty good. Between preparing lessons, preparing assignments, assessments, grading, all of that, midnight was an early bedtime. So I loved my time at the junior high. I had a great situation. but I always wanted to be at a high school. I wanted to get back into coaching high school football. I wanted to be with older students and all of that. And so it just happened that in my first year teaching, in late November, I got a phone call from an assistant principal at Clearfield High School who wanted me to interview for a Spanish teaching job there. So I interviewed and was offered the job, and I took it. So I transferred. I got there the week before winter break, and the job at Clearfield High School was to teach Spanish 1, 2, 3, 4, AP, and IB, literally doubling my workload. But I really wanted to be there. And I found out that the previous teacher had fallen ill, and for quite a while, they weren't sure what was going to happen. So they didn't get a long-term sub until they knew they were going to have to replace the teacher altogether. So for nearly half of the school year, students had a different sub each day. So you can imagine that those AP and IB students and their parents were pretty nervous about what success was going to look like for them that year. So that's what I walked into when I started at Clearfield High School. And I knew that the first thing I needed to do was to measure my students. I needed to know where they were in relation to curricular goals, to proficiency outcomes, all of that. And my only real benchmark for that was where my previous junior high students were. And then our curriculum goals and benchmarks that were detailed. I also found out that there was no curriculum for level 4 or higher in the district. So that was another challenge. So I went about figuring out how to measure my students the best way I could with my first year abilities. And then, as I mentioned, there was no curriculum for AP or IB, and I needed to know what those tests looked like because those students already had so much against them, and I needed to help them be as successful as possible. So I dove into those tests to see what they look like, what kind of things my students needed to be able to do to be successful. And I quickly found out that there was no way I was going to be able to teach them enough vocabulary to walk in and be confident, comfortable with the test, with all this stuff that they would be seeing for the first time. So the best thing that I could do would be to teach them skills and skills to where they could handle those things the first time that they encountered them, which is proficiency. So fortunately, I had an amazing district supervisor named Bonnie Peterson. I know a lot of people are familiar with Bonnie. She works for Avant Assessment as well. And Bonnie asked me to administer the stamp test to my students in mid-February to test a theory that she had about a potential correlation between stamp test scores and AP test scores. So as we look at some common proficiency guides here, we see stamp scores and how they relate to the actual proficiency guidelines, with each number being a different level on the actual proficiency guidelines. And then at the end here, we have the College Board continuum. So Bonnie's theory was that if a student got a composite score of 5 or higher on the stamp test, which is intermediate mid, then that student would pass the AP test with a 3. If a student got a composite score of 6 or higher, which is intermediate high, they would be more likely to score a 4. And if they had a composite score of 7, which is advanced low, then they would be more likely to score a 5 on the AP test. So we put that theory to test, gave the stamp test to my students. And again, based on the theory, we're looking for composite scores of 5 or higher. And then in this column, we have the predicted AP scores based on these composite scores. And so just looking at these two, we see that this is the only student that we have any concern about. And so we see that Matthew is actually low in listening and speaking. So that was really helpful data to have. So with this, I was able to go to Matthew and make a plan with him as far as things that we could do in class and things that he could do outside of class to improve his ability in these areas. Being the teacher that I am, I don't want to just see a composite score of 5 or higher. I want to see scores of at least 5 or better in every skill. So I approached Chantel about ways that we might be able to boost her reading and Britton with his listening. And so again, we did this in mid-February, which gave me about 3 months to work with these students and do these individualized plans with them. So then they took the test in May, and in July, the scores come back and we got the actual AP scores, and we got to see them compared to the predicted AP scores. And we see that our predictions were quite accurate. And we see that Matthew passed the test. So we were really excited. The results, everyone passed the test 100%. And our predictions as far as scores were actually very accurate. So I was excited to continue to do this again the next year. So the following year, my year 2, the AP students took the stamp test again. And again, looking at the composite scores, looking for 5 or higher and predicted AP scores. And we see there's 3 students here that we're concerned with and 1 who didn't finish his stamp test. Jonah here had some special circumstances. So I worked with him the best I could and again, addressed ways that he could improve writing. And then we see Jerry and John are quite low in their listening. So we made a plan of action there. And then with John as well in his speaking, Amina in her listening, and Thule in her speaking. So we had a specific plan with each one of these individuals as far as what we could do in and out of class to try and boost their odds at passing and passing with higher scores. So again, in May, they took the test. We got scores back. And again, we see that while we may have missed a little bit on some of our score predictions, what holds true is that everyone who had that 5 or higher composite score passed the test. And then Amina passed, even though she was not predicted to. We see Jerry and John did not pass. They are the ones that had pretty low listening scores. And then Jonah, who didn't finish his stamp test, did pass the AP test. So after 2 years of putting this theory to the test, everyone that we predicted would pass the test passed, and they earned the syllabi literacy. And so we were just so excited to be able to see this and kind of preview success a little bit for our students, and then to help them make any necessary changes or adaptations or tweaks to make sure that they were as successful as possible. So the next steps with that, our classes grew quite a bit, and we hired another full-time Spanish teacher, which was huge because that took Spanish 1 and 2 completely off my plate. And now I could focus just on the Spanish 3 through AP and IB. And as classes were growing, had more and more students taking Spanish 3, taking Spanish 4, taking higher level classes. So that was very important. And with that growth came some challenges, and these are not challenges that are special to me or my circumstance. These are things that you're probably either going through or have been through at some point. So the first one is vertical alignment, that transition of students from middle school or junior high to high school, from one teacher to another. As we started looking at this stamp test data and the correlation that we found with AP, and knowing what students needed to be doing and where they needed to be at with their skills at each level of Spanish, it just became very apparent that as teachers throughout the district, we were not all on the same page. We were not aligned with our understanding of proficiency, proficiency levels, the role of proficiency in the grade, we were off. We were not aligned there. And so the effects of that trickled down to the students. And so that was really difficult when a student would come to my class having done Spanish 1, 2, and 3 at their junior high and gotten straight A's. And then I'm scoring them based mostly on their proficiency. And, they're getting C's, maybe B's for the first time in their Spanish career. And they just had very different expectations in other classes. And so we needed to be better aligned as teachers. Another challenge that we had was what to do for Native and heritage speakers. My school had a lot of Native and heritage speakers, and very few, if any of them, were taking Spanish classes. And it may be because the traditional way or the traditional thing that happened with them in our schools was that, counselors would put them in Spanish 1, maybe Spanish 2. And so they would be, kind of suffering through these classes where they know how to do most, if not all of this stuff from day one. So I just thought, well, there's got to be something more, something better that we can offer them. So I wanted to address that. So at our school, we decided that if we wanted to tackle vertical alignment and the transition from one school to the next, we needed to make sure that we had our horizontal alignment really down well. So we started collaborating even more. We would look at the proficiency guidelines together. We would rate work together, rate student samples together, and really talk and just collaborate a lot about where our students were and what types of things we needed to be doing to be better and to help these students transition from his class to my class. And we also had the stamp test, which in our district was given at all schools for levels 4 and higher. We inquired to see if we could offer it to level 3 in addition to those other levels. We were given permission to do that. And so as my students would take the stamp test, my colleague would send the students that he had questions about to come and test with my students. And so the students that he would send me were students that fell into 2 categories. One was, this student is struggling, and I'm just not sure if I would recommend that they repeat the class or if they would be okay to move on. I want some external data to help me make that decision. So they would come take the stamp test and we would make that decision. The other group of students were those that were performing at a really high level. And we wondered, could that student skip Spanish 3 and just go straight to Spanish 4? Again, let's get some external assessment data to help us make that decision. So that's how we focused on our horizontal alignment. And then I also started a Spanish for Spanish speakers class. And so this is a picture of an assembly that we had with one of the news anchors from Univision Salt Lake City. The summer before we started this class, I went down and visited them to see how the news comes together, how it's reported, and all of those things, because I wanted to improve writing and some different aspects within my classroom, and also wanted the students to see different examples of how they could use their Spanish outside of school and in the workplace. And so this anchor was kind enough to come do a wonderful assembly with our students and talk about all of those things and more. So I mentioned how we did our horizontal alignment between my colleague and I. So here is a visual. So we can see our students here, some of the students that took the stamp test. We have each of their skill scores broken down here in columns. We have their average score or their composite score. And then based on that composite score, we have their proficiency rating, and then desk standards, that's standards for our Davis School District. So you can see here, for example, Clarissa had a composite score of 3.75, which is novice high, approaching intermediate low. So she had met the Spanish 2 expectations. We even put the likely AP scores and whether or not they had earned the seal of biliteracy in Spanish with those scores. And so with Clarissa having met the Spanish 2 expectations, the suggested placement for her was Spanish 3. And then we come down here to students who are in intermediate low and their likely AP scores and suggested placement, which was Spanish 4. So they were ending whichever year they were at intermediate low, which was kind of the minimum entry point for us for Spanish 4. And then intermediate mids, they've met Spanish 4 expectations. So they come into Spanish 4 at least intermediate low. They leave at least intermediate mid and go on to AP and so on and so on. And so that's how we went about placing them within our school. So as a result of all of this work that we had done based on proficiency test data with the STAMP test, the number of seals of biliteracy that we awarded increased dramatically. We were the top school in the district for students earning the seals of biliteracy. Our classes continued to grow. We almost hired a third full-time Spanish teacher. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. And our classes were enormous, but that's okay. We also found that in our school, really, it was the vast majority of the native and heritage speakers who were in the Spanish for Spanish speakers class. Most of them wanted to take the AP test, earn college credits, earn the seal of biliteracy. So that was really encouraging to see that as they learned more about opportunities, they wanted to take advantage of that. And we were very happy to help them take advantage of that. So AP class numbers grew quite a bit. And then vertical alignment issues were actually exacerbated by this, which was foreseen, where we could see it before. And then we started to place students who we had data on into the more appropriate class. It just became more and more apparent to the students now when they were in a class and were not at the appropriate proficiency level. So that was difficult for the students and for us, as we want our students to be in the position to be most successful. And so with that, I approached Bonnie, my district supervisor, about 2 areas to improve. The first was professional development. I mentioned that as teachers, we just were not on the same page with proficiency, what it is, what it looks like, what it means, its role in the grade. And so as we addressed that, Bonnie started to bring every spring really good professional development to address just those things. What the proficiency guidelines look like in written samples and spoken samples and everything else, and how to work with that. So that was a nice start. And then the second area to improve was our curriculum. I mentioned we had no Spanish 4 curriculum, no level 4 curriculum, I should say. And we had nothing for AP or IB other than prior year tests. And with what we were doing with the data, where we were identifying more AP students earlier in their high school career, and they were starting to take AP earlier. When I got there, AP was a class for seniors. Not that it had to be, that's just kind of what it was. But now, based on data, we were finding sophomores and juniors who were being very successful in that class. So because we had found that, I wanted to make that transition when a student did jump from Spanish 3 to AP less. I wanted to align our curriculum more to the AP themes, and to introduce AP tasks earlier in the curriculum from level 1 and make the tasks level appropriate, but so that those students are familiar with what they're going to be doing on AP by the time they got there. And so that if they did skip a level, it wouldn't be anything terribly dramatic. So as we began work on all of that, I also knew that there was more that I could do in terms of vertical alignment. So as I mentioned, every school in our district used STAMP for levels 4 and higher, and some used it for level 3. So what we did was ask for monetary help for our feeder schools and the STAMP data. We wanted to receive that so that we could place those students who are coming into our schools in the most appropriate class level based on proficiency. So I mentioned how we did that at our school level with all of our feeder school data. We did the same thing. We'd go in the summer, see the list of everyone who had registered for a language class, take a look at their data, and then assign them into classes. And then in borderline cases, we could look at their prompts and what they, how they responded to those prompts. And then same with speaking and writing. And so that would help us make those borderline decisions a little bit easier. And then we would give that back to the counselors. They would place those students in those classes. And then the district would send an email to the student and their parent or guardian to say, we have placed your student in level blank of world language based on this STAMP test data. And then it would also explain that your student is welcome to move to whatever level of the language they would like, with the understanding that if they move to a level beyond the recommendation, they may struggle, and that will be reflected in their grade. And if they go to a level below the recommendation, they may be bored because they are already familiar with the material or are fully capable of handling the material. And that boredom can result in behavioral issues. And we just want to do what is best for your student. So as a result of that, parents and students loved it. They loved placement based on proficiency and not seat time. And we had, the full gamut. We had students who the recommendation was to skip a level, and of course that's exciting, so they're thrilled. There was the students who had the recommendation to just continue right along, which was fine and normal. And then there were students who had the recommendation to either repeat a class or go back. And even those parents really loved the idea. They loved that the decision was based on external assessment data and that it was a teacher recommendation based on that, because we were the ones that were going to be working with their students, and they just wanted their students to learn the language. The students who had a recommendation to repeat or go back a level, initially they did not love it. However, within 2 or 3 weeks, almost all of them would approach us and thank us for getting them into a class that was most appropriate to their learning needs. And they could see and feel their growth differently than they could before. So that was really rewarding, and I'm glad that we did it. Also, as a result, we had many more students taking and passing AP tests earlier. And this just, that really blew up when we started to do it with our feeder schools. So then we identified so many more students who were coming into the high school ready for AP. And so they were going to take AP, pass the test as sophomores. Our high school building here in Utah, our high schools are, the buildings house grades 10 to 12, which I know is different from a lot of places. So in our situation, they would come in 10th grade, take and pass AP, and then they needed something else. And so I'll show what that is on the next slide here. So with all of this that we were doing at my school, all based on stamp test data. As a district now, we could focus on 4 specific areas, all based on proficiency test data. So the first area of focus was increasing the number of skills of biliteracy, including honoring the skills Native and heritage speakers already have. So Bonnie, my district supervisor, worked up an announcement and sent it to all of the language teachers to be read over the morning announcements. I translated ours into Spanish, and it basically said, for anyone in the school who speaks another language, there's an opportunity to earn the Utah State Seal of Biliteracy, whether you have been taking language classes or not, or you just speak another language because it's you were brought up speaking another language. Please see your language teachers to learn more about this opportunity. So then all of a sudden I had just a ton of kids coming through my doors after school every day asking about this. I could explain what the seal was, what that meant, pros and cons of passing, not passing, saying, if you don't pass, at a minimum, I have data on which to identify the more appropriate class for you, and all of these things. And so that helped grow their AP and heritage language classes even more. Another area of focus was getting our curriculum focused on proficiency in all 4 skills. Prior to this, we would, for world languages, every year we would have our students do a writing test, and that was really our only measure of proficiency. And so that needed to change. We needed to really focus on all 4 skills, because you assess what you value and you value what you assess. And so if we were only assessing writing, then it was just kind of indicating that that's what we valued, and the other things not as much. And so in addition to that, we also wanted to align our curriculum more to AP themes and AP tasks. The third area of focus was getting more students taking and passing the AP test earlier in their career, and then entering the bridge program. So I mentioned that in my building, we had more and more 10th and 11th graders taking and passing AP, and they needed somewhere to go after that. So the bridge program is where they would go. The bridge program was developed for the dual language immersion students. Here in Utah, the DLI program starts in kindergarten, and then in 9th grade, they're in AP and take the test. And then after that, we built a bridge program to bridge that gap between AP and entering college. So the bridge program is taught by a university professor with the high school teacher. It is taught for college credit, and they can take 3 years worth of bridge classes to earn just a bunch of college credits and basically graduate with a minor in the language. So the only prerequisite for the bridge program in Utah is that a student has passed the AP test. So I had many students who had nothing to do with the immersion program, who had passed the AP test and now were entering the bridge program. They would have to go to another school to do it. So they would carpool and all go over there together, and they did a great job. They've been very successful there. And now, as a result of Clearfield High School having so many students be a part of that program, even though Clearfield High School doesn't house immersion students, it does now have a bridge class offered there. So I was really happy to hear that. And then our fourth area of focus was vertical alignment throughout the district. So all of this coming from stamp test data, there's just so much that we saw with that and that we could do with that. And as we encountered problems, we realized that going back to that could give us at minimum a lot of guidance as far as next steps. So bringing it back to the construction analogy and how this stamp test data really changed my career. So the way that I measure students changed quite a bit from my first year to my last year. The way that I would measure them changed so much because I took the stamp test. I wanted to see where I was, and I wanted to learn from the test and see if there were ways that I could improve the types of prompts that I was giving students, if there were ways that I could improve the types of questions that I would ask my students when dealing with a reading sample or an audio sample, to more effectively help them improve in each area. My blueprints changed completely. I got blueprints for Spanish 4, and got those built to where they were all tied to AP success from level 1. My environments changed drastically. My classroom environment, we talked about proficiency quite a bit with our students, and they would rate samples from years past with names blurred out and whatnot. And they became so familiar with the proficiency guidelines that just a simple score on a paper was the feedback. They knew what that meant and where they were on their proficiency and what needed to be done to improve. Environment within my school and my district and my communities all changed. Testing or assessment wasn't a scary word anymore. We welcomed it because we knew that it was data that was going to inform important decisions going forward. And because of what I had done with data to make improvements in student outcomes and improvements to my own teaching, it became so much easier to approach my school administration or my district administration or the community council to get funding or whatever the need was for things that I needed or wanted for my students, because they knew that I was going to be based in data and make decisions that way. And finally, my tools changed quite a bit because of what I saw on stamp test results and areas where some of my students were, some of my classes, I should say, were weak consistently. I knew that I needed to learn more about that skill and how to help my students be better. And so my tools changed and were improved. I got the right tools for the right job, which makes a big difference in construction as well as in teaching. And so I appreciate your time and being with me. Again, my name is Roger Burt. I'm a regional account manager for Avant Assessment, and my email address is roger.burt@avantassessment.com. And my phone number is 801-388-8084. Thank you for your time, and please reach out for anything that I can help with. Thank you.